Hello everyone, welcome to this ISM webinar. We're going to be talking about curriculum, pedagogy and assessment, applying the revised curriculum frameworks. My name is Ed Phelan. I'm the Knowledge Hub and Resources Manager here at the ISM. To describe myself for the purpose of accessibility, I'm a white male with blonde hair, wearing a white t-shirt with a white ISM logo. Trust behind me. Today we're joined by Professor Martin Fautley and Dr. Alison Daubney as they present the new and revised frameworks for curriculum, pedagogy and assessment in music education. These webinars are designed to help you address key issues in curriculum and to consider the interrelationships between them within your own teaching context. We will be discussing guidance on thinking about assessment in context, exploring progress in classroom and musical learning, accessing music musically, and planning, promoting, and evidencing children and young people's musical learning and development over time. We are going to have a demonstration and a lecture from Martin and Ali now, and then we're going to have a Q&A section at the end. So please use the chat box or the Q&A box below to send your questions in. Please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. This webinar will be recorded and sent out later on with the slides, and you can find the full curriculum documents on our website. And now I'm going to hand over to Martin and Ali. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, so I'm Martin Fautley. I'm Emeritus Professor of Music Education from Birmingham City University, and I'm an old white male sitting in a stripy shirt with grey hair. So there's me on this afternoon.
Hello, I'm Ali Daubney. I'm an honorary senior lecturer in music education at the University of Sussex. I'm a little bit younger than Martin. I've got blonde hair. I'm sitting with a bookshelf behind me and I've got a stripy t-shirt on today. We're going to be talking to you today, as Ed said, about curriculum, pedagogy and assessment and how all of these things fit together. We've revised the framework which we originally put together. If Ella, you can move on to the next one for us, around primary music specifically. And so therefore, we're really thinking here about the kind of 5 to 11 age range, but we are thinking about kind of children coming in with lots of experiences from previously. On the next slide, you will see there is a link that will take you straight to the materials. There is a booklet with lots of things that we're sharing today. And there's also a big fancy wall chart that if you printed it out, you could put on your classroom wall that is kind of bringing together some of those things. Ed's already talked us through the things that we are going through today, which are on the next slide. But really, the idea of this is, it's framed around the idea of assessment in context, the context being that it's within the musical learning and not separate from the musical learning.
Okay, and if we have a quick look at the next slide. This booklet is currently out of print, which isn't a very helpful thing to say, but we'll be back very soon, because one of the things that Ali and I are very keen to say is that the assessment and curriculum materials we're presenting has a sound research base. And we think that that's very important to say, and we have made our thinking visible in this version of the booklet. It's not quite there yet. This is the old one. The updated one will be there very, very soon indeed. But there is, we would hasten to say, a sound theoretical, theorized research base to the things we're talking about. So important to say that.
I think something else that's important to say is that all of the materials that you see, so the primary booklet and of course the orange booklet when it comes back in its revised form, they are all free. And we are very clear that we wanted them to be free. We're very thankful actually to the ISM Trust for making that possible. You can look at them, decide if you like them or don't like them or whatever you want to do with them. But yeah, they're there for you to see. So if we start from the notion of curriculum. And we're going to use something here from Pollard and Triggs to look at that ties together lots of things around curriculum to kind of I guess, help understand that the curriculum is not just something that's written down, that is an official stated programme of learning. So that might be part of the curriculum, the official curriculum, if you like. But the curriculum is much richer than that. And so within that is everything that is learned here, it says, during school activities that's not part of the official curriculum. And if you think about the habits, the values, the behaviours and the attitudes, for example, that children pick up from going to school, from singing in assemblies, from being part of something. So lots of different bits of things come together. It's not just what happens in the classroom, but what happens in the whole school community. And we're going to talk today, when we use the word community, we are thinking quite broadly about community being the wider community, the people from outside the school, if you like, or the parents, or the context in which the school sits, the cleaners, the school dinner ladies, and all of those people. They're all part of this community, with pupils, of course, and staff and parents. The one that's in red at the bottom is something we're particularly interested in, which is around the curriculum as experienced. And it's the parts of the curriculum, both hidden and official, which actually can meaningfully connect with children. And that's quite an important point, really, which takes us on to what we're terming as Big Question 1. Now, Big Question 1 thinks about, first of all, for yourself, what it is that you value in music education. So we're really providing you with an opportunity to go back and think about, what do we do? Why do we do it? What do we want from music education? What is it that we value? And of course, a lot of people's responses to this will have overlaps, but they will be slightly different. If you think about what it is that you value in music education, and then also think about and also ask your pupils what it is that your pupils value in music education. Because the curriculum that you design, it's up to each school what it is that they put into a curriculum, and how that curriculum is brokered and how it's delivered, and whether there's any kind of co-construction ideas there that takes in what children value within music. And then the third bullet point there is thinking about your school community and what it is that your community values. And that, I think, you would find has very different responses again. So, for example, a lot of schools, what they may initially say they value in music education is having the Christmas production, having a school choir, having the extra things too. But we're very much coming at this from the idea that music education starts, within a school, in the classroom. Of course, children bring into that lots of things. So it doesn't start in the classroom because they're already coming in with a lot of experiences from music. But thinking about what your community values in music and how all of that comes together. Now, these are all really quite important, because if you look at the next big question 2 on this, you need to think about whether what you have decided is valued appears in your community's offer and in the wider school offer. You have a huge amount of choice. Why is it that you choose to do what you do in the order that you do it? Why is it that you choose to do something on, for example, you may have reggae music, or you may do something for Black History Month, or you may have it as a cross-curricular thing with musical learning going through the cross-curriculum, thinking about the learning within it. But why is it there? And how does what everybody values, does it actually go through? So where we've said, how does it value? I suppose the first question to that is, does it value? And then on the next slide, we're really talking about bringing in what your community, building on what your community brings in. So thinking about the uniqueness of every school and every community. There's no reason not to build on that and have units of work, or have some areas of work that can recognise that and can grow those ideas. And also to think about small children. If you look at young children before they start school, they might be sitting on the floor, banging saucepans, driving people mad, but banging out rhythms and exploring and trying out different sounds. They're usually quite vocal. They've normally got lots of song fragments in their heads, and then whole songs in their heads. And they'll be playful with those and experiment with those and experiment with their voices and the sounds that they hear. So, all of that is a great playground, if you like, for us to be able to start thinking about the children that we have in our school, the cultures of our schools and our communities, and try and build on those in our kind of unique and original ways. Musical learning in schools in our programme, and lots of other programmes really, is built around these processes, the things that you do, the ing words, singing, playing lots of different instruments, playing lots of different sounds, composing, improvising, being playful with that, and listening, of course, as part of that. And there are three overarching ideas which run through everything that happens in schools, which are around creativity, around critical engagement, and the broader aspects of learning. And really, it's about the kind of interrelationship between making and creating music, and then thinking about music, and kind of thinking and being responsive to music. So what you won't see on our thing here is something about appraising that's actually split separately, because critical engagement and music is some of that discerning kind of listening to something and going, oh, that's I like that because, or oh, that finished with a melody that's going down. Oh, and thinking about music in lots of different ways. And so really that's what we're talking about there when we talk about critical engagement. There are a couple of notes that we wanted to pick out just to kind of frame this. There's quite a few different things in our booklet that we talk about, but a couple of things to specifically pull on. One of them is about learning by ear, and that comes on something we're going to be talking about in a minute. But actually, a lot of musical learning happens by learning by ear. So I don't know, Martin, have you got a tune in your head? I haven't primed him for this.
Have I got a tune in my head? I
Yeah.
can have one if you'd like me
Okay,
to at
put
this
a,
very
put a tune
moment.
in your head. What's your tune?
Oh, has it got? I've got an
Yeah.
original tune. I was
Yeah, no,
composing
or a
as I went
song, or
along.
have you got a song in your head?
Yes, why not?
All right. Okay. What's the song in your head?
Well, I conduct a Gilbert and Sullivan Society, and so you having said that, I immediately thought of the Major General's song from Pirates of Penzance.
Okay. So if you conduct a society, does everybody in your society, did they pick that up and sing it along in their cars from literally just looking at the musical notation and slavishly remembering that, or have they learnt it in other ways too?
It's an amateur Gilbert and Sullivan Society in a suburb of Birmingham, and the number of people who can read music is limited to very few, shall we say. So
Right.
they've learned it by ear. They've learned it by the pianist very kindly bashing out the notes on the piano. They've made a recording of it. They listen to it in the car.
Yeah.
That's how they've learned it.
Okay, and so learning by ear is actually it's really something that we just do all the time. And for example, I don't know, I'll put in I got "Don't Stop Me Now" going in my head because I saw my brother at the weekend and he's a massive Queen fan. My brother can't read music, but he's absolutely word perfect on the back catalogue of Queen, I would say. All kind of picked up along the way from listening to by ear. So it's such a valuable part of what we do, and to be able to kind of internalize sounds and that kind of thing. So we think it's really worth bringing that to the attention of thinking about curriculum and what that means. And then on the right hand side, you'll see just about what we were talking about earlier, actually, about the early years context and how early years and primary have to include lots of different things. Rich music education comes from lots and lots of different perspectives about making and creating music, which is a very practical thing. And so they learn about music through being completely involved in music. And so when you read our ideas, just to kind of set in motion, that is where we are very much coming from. And now I'm going to pass over to Martin.
So in fact, Ali has just been talking about this. This is the notion of notation. And we know that musical notation can be a bit of a sticking point for many generalist primary teachers who feel that in order to be able to teach music, they need to begin by teaching staff notation. And if they can't read it themselves, then they feel essentially they can't even get on the bus, let alone go anywhere, and the bus goes off without them. And we think it's really important to say that the statement on this slide, musical notation exists to support musical learning. So it should be used appropriately. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but I've been involved for many years in a project called Listen, Imagine, Compose. And the latest iteration, Listen, Imagine, Compose Primary, this was a big issue for many teachers. We can't teach composing because we can't use musical notation. And so that once you start to unpick this and think, well, actually you can, and for all the reasons that Ali has just been talking about, there's more to musical learning than learning notation. So the key, I don't want to dwell too long on this, but essentially the notion that learning musical notation need not be an end in itself, it should be done to support music making, is a really key point. So depending on where you all are in your various journeys, we don't want people to get hung up on saying we can't do this because we can't do music notation, therefore we're going to go and play rounders instead or something. So it's quite important that we deal with that, and then we can move on to being musical. In fact, let's move on to another slide, shall we? So, hint. Oh, good. My computer's having a go slow this afternoon, and I don't blame it. The notion of a spiral curriculum is actually quite well embedded in education generally, and in music education. For the work that we've been doing, Ali and I had a go at drawing our own version of a spiral curriculum. And the idea is that the spiral curriculum means that children and young people can move up and down it depending on what they're doing. And so this is quite important to think about increasing challenge, because people can do different things in different ways. So I've just been talking about composing. So if people are composing using glockenspiels, for example, and they can be moving up to quite an advanced level. And then if they're then introduced to a new instrument, if they start having, I don't know, clarinet lessons, then they might move, I won't say down the spiral, but I don't mean pejoratively. They move to a different place on the spiral in order to then come back. And music is going to be like that throughout. We've drawn these various elements, singing, improvising, listening, playing, composing, and they go round and round. And then running through all of them are these broader aspects, as the vertical arrow, creativity that's running, and critical engagement that Ali's already talked about. So we feel that this is an important and useful way to be thinking about what's going on in curriculum. And it's also quite important to think about it, because what we're not saying is it's not a straight line on a graph. My hand is being a graph at the moment, and it's not a straight line progressing like that. So we think that this idea of the spiral curriculum is actually very useful. And so that's quite important. So if we then look at that in terms of what we say on the next slide, then what we're thinking about in this is the idea of learning and progression. And one of the key things that we think that we want to really try and emphasize is the notion that progression is a really complex thing in music. And we've put those three phrases at the bottom: look like, sound like, and feel like. What does progression look like? In music, what does it sound like? And for the children and the young people, for the teacher, for the classes, for everybody, what does it feel like? And what's the idea? What's the various bits of learning that are going on at each point? And this is summarized by that sort of phrase we put on the left: we've done ukulele. Well, what does that mean? If you've done ukulele, what have you done? What have they learned? What are they doing with the ukulele? What is happening? And you can insert any word you like for ukulele. You can put anything in there. What does it mean to have done something? And there's an awful lot in music that we need to think about the idea of progression in terms of what's happening. Now, Ali, anything you want to add at that point? I'm looking at you meaningfully there. No? Okay, a very small face is saying, no, that's all right then, good. I'd hate to be missing anything out. So on the next slide is a diagram that looks relatively complex, but Hopefully I'll try and make it simpler. In music, what we have is this constant round and round of understanding and doing. What does that mean? In music, you learn something by doing it, and then you show that you understand it by being able to do it. So, if we take, let's go to the sort of classical world for the moment, because I am utterly unable to get a sound out of an oboe. Actually, that's not true. If I try and play an oboe, it sounds like I'm strangling a duck. It is utterly beyond me to get a sound out of an oboe. So you wouldn't want me playing oboe in a concert that you've got coming up. On the other hand, as a reasonably literate, I hope, professor, I can write you an essay about the oboe. I can probably, given enough time, write you an essay about the history of the oboe since its early origins through to whatever. But you wouldn't book me for a concert on the basis of playing the oboe because I can write an essay about it. And this is true across all ranges of music. We need the assessment to be appropriate to the activity. And so if somebody is doing something, they show that they can understand it by being able to do it. And that's what we mean by this understanding and doing. Understanding is evidenced in achievement. My understanding of the oboe, only limited to being able to write about it, isn't a lot of help in terms of doing oboe-ness, if you see what I mean. So, I mean, that's a very sort of extreme example, but that's how it works. And then underneath the going round and round this, it's another form of spiral, if you like, are three triangles: identify, quantify, and help. And this is where assessment comes in, because what, as teachers, we're trying to do is we're identifying what it is that pupils can do and possibly need help with, hence the help box. And then for assessment, we often have to quantify it. So those three triangle boxes underneath are all related. So we're thinking about identifying, quantifying, and helping, and we're moving around that understanding and doing spiral. Okay, so we now move to a very brightly coloured slide with tiny, tiny print on it, and I can see people now. I can't see you at all, so feel free, sitting with their faces about half an inch away from the screen. I've got the printout version, so I don't have to sit with my face half an inch away from the screen because I can't see it either. But what this is doing is this slide, holds booklet up to camera, is the central part of the PDF that you can download that contains the materials which the ISM Trust have so kindly produced. So what this is doing is this is taking apart a series down the left, the different colour boxes of musical processes: singing, playing, improvising, composing, listening, and the broader aspects. And then across the top, it asks you questions. And the reason that we've done it like this is quite deliberate, because we don't think a one-size-fits-all curriculum is going to work. And there's a number of reasons for that. We've both been into many, many schools across a whole variety of contexts. And we've seen a huge range of teaching and learning in music. And it's very difficult to place these onto a continuum in ways that make it logical and clear. But if we're trying to say, why does a one-size-fits-all model not work? Well, if we take let's take a famous example of, if you watch TV at Christmas, you'll see the King's College Choir in Cambridge performing 9 lessons and carols. They will have a music curriculum in their school. They will be singing Evensong in King's College numerous times a week and preparing for these high-level performances. And then not very far up the road will be a perfectly normal primary school where they're not singing Evensong every day and they're not preparing for 9 lessons and carols in the same way to be broadcast around the world. The curriculum that fits one school isn't necessarily going to fit another. And Alice already talked about community. So what do the different communities bring? So that's why these are phrased as questions rather than as statements of what you should be doing, because we're very aware that everybody's context is different. So if we run across the top, it says, for example, under singing, what singing skills you aim to develop. Then it asks, how are you going to develop them? How are you going to develop them? What's the knowledge and understanding of singing? And so on. I don't need to read them all out, and I appreciate you probably can't read them. But if you look at them later on, these questions are purposefully designed to help with what you do. So if we go on to the next slide, it is slightly easier to read. And this takes that very text that I've just said, and these are the questions with the text written much larger. So these are designed for you to be thinking about what it is that you are doing with your kids in your school, in your context, with your resources, in your very specific ways of dealing with it, what is going on. So these are the key points that are lifted out and asking you to reflect on, and ways to think about what it is that you are doing in your context.
Something in here that's really important to remember is that you don't need to do each of these in every single lesson. And that with these, for example, you might be doing something that's focusing on improvising. It might be focusing on singing. So it's not a tick list thing. It's for you to think about what's the focus of this unit, or what's the focus of this lesson. So you can also use it as a kind of long-term, medium-term and short plan, if you like, planning idea, thinking I want to cover all of these over a period of time, but my lesson doesn't have to be so whiz bang that includes everything now. Back to you, Martin.
No, and that's really important, because I don't think it's possible to do all of this in one lesson. It would be so fragmented. The point is, as Ali said, to think about what's going on in this lesson and how does it fit into the bigger picture. And so really be thinking specifically about what's happening there. And really importantly, don't try and do it all in one go. Just take a little bit, start, see how it goes, think about what it is that you're doing. So the next slide, for example, comes from this comes from these materials, but we've just rotated it through 90 degrees to be slightly easier to read. So the planning question and the curriculum materials question relate to what is it that you're doing and why are you doing it now? And then how are you doing it? So the boxes why and how are there to show you what's happening, to ask you to reflect on that. And then it asks you to think about the assessment criteria, and we'll come on to assessment criteria in a little bit more detail later on. But it's important that we think about how we structure and put this together. And so that's the point of the questions and the different types of questions. And the next slide in this sequence does more of that, and it makes some suggestions as to how you can assess things. And again, you couldn't do all of these in one go, but there's some important ones that we really want to emphasize in here. So it's not just about notation in music, staff notation, other notations, graphic notations, graphic scores, guitar tab, even just words are fine. And then the idea of exploring, talking, creating and making, responding, all of these are ways that children can respond to music, and we can think about as sources of assessment data. And anything can be data, and it's important that we don't just think of data in very small numbers and very small focuses from what we're doing.
So we're going to move on to talk about a little bit about what are your priorities, or really to get you to think about what are the priorities for your children in your school at this time. And if you move on to the next slide for me, there's a few questions here to get you thinking. So for example, if your children in your class have a music lesson sustained throughout the year, which we hope they do, and you added up the time over the year, if they had half an hour a week, you're probably looking at, by the time you've had the school dentist, a couple of trips. and some rehearsals or something else going on, they're probably going to get around 15 hours a year, 15 hours, that's it, of musical learning as part of that taught curriculum time over the year. If they have an hour a week, you're probably looking at around 30 hours. If they have 2 hours, looking at 60 hours. So when you're thinking about your priorities, be realistic. In my time I have available, this is what I aim to do. Now, around that, you also have lots of other opportunities for musical learning. So when you have things like singing assemblies, that doesn't just have to be we sing a song from beginning to end. There's many opportunities to choose repertoire carefully, to be able to kind of move children on in their learning, and also to work on that in ways that develop their skills and their musicality along the way too, so that becomes part of the musical learning too. So that's one of your questions, really. Have you worked out what your priorities are for that time? And our framework is absolutely not about planning the hilt out of something. You need to have kind of this idea of the big picture and what it is you're trying to do across a period of time, and then kind of breaking that down. But we're also thinking about coherence, as in, do things come in an order that is coherent? Is there for children a way to recognise that what they did before when they were bucket drumming links to what they're doing 2 years later when they're making stomp videos in multi-parts, and how do these skills kind of link? I think a lot of the things that come up that we see around coherence are that we need to make more explicit links for ourselves, and then definitely for our children, about things. I think Martin's going to talk about this one a little bit in a minute, but just stick in your head, how does your curriculum in and of itself evidence progress? And if you've worked out these other questions we've talked about along the way, about why do you do that and why do you do that now, then the idea of that is to think about, well, what's the progression that you're trying to plan for? We need to be clear that we called it curriculum, pedagogy and assessment, because you can have the best plan on paper, but you do actually have to bring that to life. And so what you do and what your team do in your classroom, your TAs, for example, the teaching itself, the way you go about something is actually crucially important too. So the you in this is very important. And then thinking about holistically or atomistically, are you thinking coherently yourself about over time, or are you just thinking, oh my goodness, it's Tuesday morning, I've got to do a music lesson. Oh my goodness, is it Tuesday again? I've got to do another music lesson. What are the things that you're doing? How do they link together? How does the singing that they're doing feed into the improvising, the composing? So obviously the playing of instruments and the singing and the use of technologies too are just often ways in which we can help children enact the sound. So thinking about all of those in relation to where the learning is going. I think I'm going to pass over to you, Martin, because it links to question 3. The next slide.
Yep. So here's a question that doesn't have a right answer, because it will depend on your context. Now, we know for many of our secondary colleagues, they work backwards from the assessment, particularly at Key Stage 4, and then plan the curriculum. But we also know that some of our primary colleagues are supplied with assessment materials from things like multi-academy trusts and other groupings of school, and they're doing something similar. Or are you working from a planned curriculum and then you're devising assessments to go with it? So it's not that there is a right and a wrong, there are different ways of doing things. And I've spoken to teachers who say, no, I start with the assessment and then work out what I'm going to assess and then teach it. So it's completely up to you, and maybe that's not true. You can say it's up to the context I'm in tells me to do it. But there are different ways of thinking about what's going on in the planning of your curriculum, which the next slide unpicks a little bit more. So what do you want pupils to learn and be able to do at various stages? And this relates back to that slide a few minutes ago that had boxes and triangles. What's the activity, what's the doing, and what's the learning? Have you defined learning and doing, or have you thought about doing and then you work out what they're learning later? Or have you thought about learning and then you work out what they're going to do in order to learn what it is that you want them to learn? And again, these are important things to think about. And the really vital one musically is, how is quality expressed in these? What does a good one sound like is a really important assessment question. So what is quality? How does it relate to the idea of activities and learning? And have you defined them? So how do you know? And then, of course, there's the really difficult question about building your curriculum for pupils. And every class has kids with different musical experiences. There's different motivations, different learning requirements. All of these have to be dealt with, and all of these have to be done in quite a complicated way. And music really evidences this very wide disparity that you can find in a single class. Okay, over to Ali, who's going to talk about criteria now.
So when you're thinking about planning your curriculum, it's kind of like you want to put something in the middle of the dartboard. And I appreciate these are extremely small. And if my glamorous assistant over there had his booklet, he would possibly hold up for us that it's actually on a page that it has all of these criterion statements. And so it says here they're example criterion statements, and they absolutely are. The idea of these is not that you can read across from 1A to 1B, 1C, 1D. We put them as stages because there are no age-related expectations for music in the national curriculum. And so, as I talked about earlier, if you've got 15 hours, you can't honestly get the same outputs as if you've got an 30-hour curriculum, or you're doing evensong every day, so they are going to look different. If you can go on to the next slide, I broke a few of these down just to show. So we took from stage A. Stage A might be that we're going to do loads and loads and loads and loads of things that help children to recognise and broadly control changes in timbre, tempo, pitch and dynamics when playing instruments and vocally. So the idea of control comes over time. Often little children are either really loud or they're really quiet, and there's not a lot in between. So we're trying to help them to develop this idea of developing control to change different things. So you would just have that as your criteria, and then your curriculum is built around potentially doing lots of things that explore this, and you can have a lot of fun with it. In stage B, there's one here that says sing in tune within a limited pitch range. The thing about working with small children is singing is often unsuccessful when the adult sings too low for the children to copy, because they will try to copy at the pitch quite naturally that they do. And when you see small children in the pram, you do go up to them and you go, "Oh, that's sweet," go, "Oh, that's sweet," so and then you start singing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," whatever it may be, and they can't successfully do that. So within the teaching, we would think about what is the pitch range which they can sing in, and then we might, for ourselves, sound a bit like we're singing higher than we normally would, shall we say, but thinking about those kind of things. Within the primary toolkit that's on the ISM website, which is also free, there's lots of advice and things with Sing Up that talk about those kind of things. But if they can sing in tune with within the limited pitch range, and their accuracy is getting better, and they're performing with a good sense of pulse and rhythm, it gives us ideas about the things that we might be working on as skills and knowledge at that time. And on the next slide, I just picked out a couple from stage C and stage D. So you can see hopefully that by the time they get stage C, they might be maintaining an independent part in a small group, whereas often with the younger children, they'll be doing something all together, because the success of them being able to do something in a small group, they probably haven't secured that skill yet. So you can see there's ideas of progression that come through. And then the last one from stage D is using a variety of musical devices, timbres, textures, techniques when creating and making music. So deciding for themselves, they've got all of the language, and they've got the possibilities of things that they've played with. So here's some real examples, if you like, for you to be able to go away and play with, because if you've got these and you know what your curriculum is trying to do, then it takes us into assessing music. And I'm going back to Martin.
There's a really nice quote from the great music educator Keith Swanwick, who said, "To teach is to assess." And we think that this is so true. So on the next slide, we have a very important statement. If you could press return again, it gives us the content, please. Hello? Oh, thank you. Good. I said my computer's having a go slow. Right. So these nice colourful boxes are the important statements. We think assessment begins with curriculum planning. And as in what we were saying a few minutes ago, curriculum planning should begin with learning, not content, and assessment arrives or derives from this. And it's really important that we think carefully about what it is that we're going to be doing. There are, as Ali said, there are no externally imposed assessments at this stage. So in fact, through the national curriculum, there is no externally imposed assessment until Key Stage 4. So assessment can truly arise from curriculum. And on the next slide is another important statement. And we genuinely hope that we're not doing what Ross et al. Talked about in the 1990s. Assessment means enduring a form of mental and emotional derangement, the morbid exchange of a warm living experience for a cold, dead reckoning. And we really, really hope that that's not where we're at. So what we want is something genuinely musical and really musically purposeful. So on the next slide, which has an awful lot of text on it, for which, again, apologies, we want you to try and really think about what it is that's going on. And we know that the idea of formative assessment is absolutely well embedded in schools, but sometimes in music, it can be not quite as well understood as we might hope. And there are true formative assessment strategies. So in the second bullet point, for example, formative assessment done properly doesn't need to involve numbers or grades. It doesn't involve however many different coloured pens that you're doing. Or somewhere I've got a verbal feedback given stamp. It doesn't involve stamping that in their book, or if they're singing, it doesn't involve stamping their foreheads. It's supposed to be about what it is that's going on, what you say to the pupils. So good formative assessment can be as simple as just having a conversation with your pupils, asking questions. Sometimes it can just be playing along or singing along or just clapping beside them to keep them in time and helping them to develop things. This is all part of formative assessment. And it can be all sorts of other things too. And the key thing is that it's developmental. It helps them and you recognise what they have done, and importantly, what they might be doing next. So it's informing what's coming next, and it's helping them, really be able to do this. Ali, you've usually got lots to say about formative assessment.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time. That's the only thing. But I think for me, I would say that what's really important is that the you in the classroom, the teacher with the radar, knowing where to be, what to do, noticing somebody's out of time, or something's going on, or you can unpick it through just listening to what they're talking about, and those kind of things. All of that is actually, if you want to call it your data, your assessment. It doesn't. Primary music, when it's done well, is really light touch on the kind of writing things down, note keeping, but make sure you video things and use them as part of your teaching. Don't do what I did in years gone by and have tapes still sitting in the drawer of things to play back. It's very easy these days to use technology and formative assessment and formative tools and formative teaching. I think the word assessment gets in the way actually. Quite often of this idea of process. Do you want to move on to the next slide? We're going to very quickly wrap up with the idea around the framework that we have. So we had some statements that we put up earlier. For example, there was one there about singing broadly in time, or if you go to the next slide for us, it explains how you use it. But if what you're trying to do is suggest, follow, and lead simple performance directions, as a teacher, you're kind of scanning around going, yes, they're able to do it. No, they're not quite there yet. Or they're confidently able to do it and working beyond, and I'm giving them something that kind of deepens that experience. A lot of schools, I was working with primary teachers on Friday, a lot of schools are using a 3-point scale. We were talking on Friday about it's report writing season. And at the end of the year, a lot of primary assessment in music, or the feedback at the reporting part of it at least, comes down to making this, if you want to call it, summative judgment, and saying this is where they are. And I was saying, be sure that if you know for yourself, and certainly if you were challenged about what is it that they're trying to do, and you can say yes, they're working towards, or working beyond, whatever your language on that may be.
I think it's important on this slide to point out that these ways of grading, and they are grading forms, are designed to go with the assessment criterion statements we were talking about earlier. And we tried to write the criterion statements in such a way that a single statement can be graded with 3 outcomes. So we don't have 3 separate assessment statements. We have one statement that leads to then the answer being either the pupil isn't able to do it yet, they are able to do it, or they can confidently do it. We haven't written them. We haven't written 3 separate assessment criterion statements. We've written one statement that you can grade in 3 different ways. And that's the point. Now, you can use the statements and grade groups of children. You can grade the whole class. You can shade them individually. The important thing is that the criterion statements essentially are based on one thing. We've tried to assess a singularity. And so we've put that in there, and then we've put these various ways of grading them as ways that you can use in order to come up with something that shows pupil work and demonstrates attainment. And we hope that they can be, well, we know that they can be used both formatively and summatively. But if you're thinking about summative assessment, it's the 3-point grading that we think is important to do with those statements.
And the grading and the statements in particular that you come up with, I suppose, at this time of year, you're looking back across a huge body of work. And Martin and I had a really good discussion on Saturday about cakes and Yorkshire puddings, actually. Because I was thinking about the idea of, a big cake, of which you are teaching one slice of that cake in terms of a child's musical learning and musical experiences. And so when you're making a judgment on the end of, at the end of the year, what do you know about everything else that goes on that they musically do, and how are you drawing on that? And if you have to grade, which hopefully you don't, but some schools do insist on it, then what we say can make and break children. And how we put numbers down and how we put grades down on things. So we need to be really fair to them and draw in lots of different things. The conversation we had was about eggs, wasn't it, Martin, and how that fitted into
Yes, it was essentially, if you're eating a cake, then you're unlikely to be able to grade the eggs separately at the end once you're doing cake eating. And so maybe there's some issues that are useful. However, I'm worrying that if we start talking about cake too much at 10 to 5 on a Monday afternoon, we're going to lose people very rapidly.
And we're just going to move on then to the end of today's presentations before we take some questions. Our final thoughts really are drawn from the booklet that we've put together. Music is something that's absolutely great fun for children when it's accessible and it's enjoyable, which needs to be in the heart of what you do. Then you put that in and it's part of this creative mixture, which makes schools really joyful places to be, makes children feel that they can be part of something and a part of its community, particularly if they can see themselves reflected in the music education that they have. So although for maybe about the last 15 minutes, we've been talking about this kind of bearing down on assessment, actually the richness of what you can achieve in music in the classroom and also around the school with the other things that you do musically brings the kind of artistic meaning and the importance to young people's lives in developmental, inspiring, creative and inclusive ways.
Yep. And the final slide I think we can do is just a reminder that the materials are available either by QR code or from the website address there. And I'm sure that the guys from the ISM very kindly will supply all that information separately and later on. So there we go. So that's us done. And I've seen Ed has just reappeared in the corner of my screen.
Thanks, guys. That's fantastic. And yeah, we'll be sending out this video and the slides and links to all the curriculum documents for everyone as well. And they're in the chat. Feel free, guys, to send in some questions using the chat box or the Q&A function, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. That was great. We have one question here which touches on one of your last points there. How can we evidence progress in instrument learning without reducing it to levels or grades?
I guess instrument learning for me comes through everything that happens in music education. I'm not sure who the question came from and whether they're talking about instrument learning, for example, in a whole class context, or somebody who's having private violin lessons, or whether they're talking about everybody is playing the xylophone, that, everything together, because playing instruments will come through the making and creating of music, all of in the whole of the curriculum. So the interesting thing about grades is, if we think about, you're probably thinking about exam board grades from listening to the way that you phrased the question there, which is something that we haven't talked about. It's something that's quite an English context, actually, and quite alien to a lot of people from other places. So the evidence from that comes from knowing what it is that you're trying to get them to do, playing with more control, stylistically, whatever it is, using video to evidence that. Depends what you want to evidence it for. There's a really great quote, actually, from Janet Mills, which talks about playing things that they've played previously, but playing them better. What does better mean? It means playing them probably more fluently, more more musically, as in they've acknowledged that there's an audience there, that they've started to have more control of their instrument, that there's more dynamic variation, that when they're playing with an ensemble, they do actually start and stop together. They're aware of the person next to them and they're not playing louder than they were before. So there's that side of things. And then there's also the I've got a grade 6 violinist in my year 4 class, what am I going to do about it question, which is kind of bound up with this, and something we didn't really have time to touch on this afternoon. But we need to make sure that through the making and creating of music, we find ways for those children to be firstly included and extended, so that becomes part of what we do, and draw on their skills and use them, because otherwise those children feel that music at school can be a complete waste of time to them, and I always think that's a crying shame. Martin, you got anything to add?
Well, I think it depends what you mean by evidence, because I would hope that the evidence is musical, that they have evidenced the fact that they don't play the same as they did 9 months ago. So I think that question needs a lot of unpicking, really.
Fantastic. We've one here. Do you have any suggestions on how to link improvisation and composition at primary level? Some of my students struggle to understand how they are related.
Right, okay. Shall I start, Ali?
Yeah, go on then. I think we could talk about this all day, couldn't we?
Yes, we could talk about this all day. I've already mentioned I've been involved for years with a project called Listen, Imagine, Compose Primary. Can I suggest whoever asked the question Googles Listen, Imagine, Compose Primary and looks for the toolkit, and there will be some ideas in there. Oh, I'm going to cough, excuse me. The other thing is, improvising, I can't remember who said it, I think it was a composer that I was working with. He said composing is improvising revisited. And so improvising leads, it doesn't have to, but improvising can lead into composing. So it depends on how the thing is structured and put together. So improvising can lead to composing. Composing can be improvising revisited, or improvising can be something that happens as a thing by itself in its own space. And there's an awful, I mean, improvising covers a whole gamut of things. There's a lot that can be done in improvising, from, clapping, from call and response, there's a range of things, and these can then lead into composing. One of the things that I think, maybe this isn't the time to go off on a tangent, but it depends if people are then thinking about the nature of the composing that's being done. And this is where I'd want very significantly to detach it from notating. So I think we need to think about those as separate, interrelated components, but that can be done, and one can lead into another. I'll stop there because I can talk about this for at least 3 hours without taking a breath.
I think in a primary classroom, if we give ourselves permission for it to be fun and a bit fluid, is something, doing something, seeing where it goes, setting little things that allow children and teachers, because that's important that we model that too, to kind of doodle with the sound and be playful with sounds and kind of open up musical possibilities and the kind of what if. And I think if you go to the resource that Martin's talking about, List and Magic Composed Primary, it gives you lots and lots of opportunities for that. So I would say do more improvising for sure anyway in a primary context. The idea of composing, if you ask a child, I think it was Joe Glover's work, talks about, children think a composer is a kind of old person who's got notation all over the floor. And so then you go and ask them to compose and like, oh, how do I fit into that? How is that me? So, being playful all the time. And I would often say, when there's 5 minutes after break, when they've come in and they're a bit fractious because they've had a horrible time with each other in the playground, do something that's musical and exploratory that kind of takes their minds off of the fact that somebody else has kicked the football over the fence or whatever it may be, and just use those little 5-minute things to be playful with sounds and kind of use that in an exploratory way that you can lead into, so that the word composing and the idea of composing can become quite formalized quite quickly otherwise. And that's sometimes where it goes a little bit wrong in primary music.
Fantastic. We've time for one or two more, I think. I'm keen to integrate music technology into my lessons. However, I'm a classical musician without a lot of experience with technology. Do you have any suggestions for introducing this at primary level?
Yes. Go to the free things. Well, start from what the school has available, basically, in terms of things that have they got a whole class set of iPads that they're able to go and use? Look at free things like GarageBand, which are on there. With very small children, they come into school these days being able to swipe. I was going to say swipe left and right, but that's not quite right in this context, is it? But they swipe the screen and they choose, and they're discernible about what it is they want to listen to. So they already have some technological skills. A lot of them know what a transport bar is, where to press play and rewind and all of that kind of thing. Lots of websites have got free tools for children to be able to play around with things, with sounds. Organisations like MTech have got resources and videos and units, and I think there's lots of things embedded in with things like Charanga and all of that kind of stuff too for technology. I think you have to think about, though, what do I want to use the technology for? The technology, am I using it as another instrument? Am I using it as the thing that I use, like Audacity, to record something, to change sounds, to adapt them? So it goes back to those big curriculum questions about what was the purpose of the technology that I'm trying to use here, without trying to bypass that question.
And also talk to the local music hub.
Yeah.
There might be somebody there who not only knows about the stuff, but might have the availability to do something about it. So I think one of the first things, the first things is do exactly what Ali said, but also talk to the local music hub.
Yeah, some of the hubs have got things like DJing whole class instrumental programs going and that kind of thing. So there's lots of options out there for technologies and support with technologies, so that the teachers kind of upskilled at the same time as the students to be able to take it on.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We're just out of time, unfortunately, but that was great. Thank you very much, Martin and Ali. We're going to be back next Monday on the 23rd at 4 p.m. again, where we're going to look at secondary level education curriculum. Thank you for joining us. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact us at inquiries@ismtrust.org, or ring our membership, or contact us through our website. We're going to be sending around a short survey afterwards. It'd be great if you could fill it in to give us some feedback. We'll be sending around the live recording of this and the slides as well. Thanks everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great evening.